2 straight weeks of miserable football, and even with an extra day and an extra week with a new quarterback to prepare, the Cincinnati Bengals lay an egg, and this time even more so on a primetime setting, falling 28-3 to the Denver Broncos. Broncos scored 28 unanswered points, and the Bengals absolutely sputtered to do anything correctly on Monday night. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and we are here with our aftermath episode to break down not only this disgusting display of football that we saw once again for 2 straight weeks, but also to talk about what may be coming. Are things fixable? I mean, there are just so many questions right now, but I know it may be tough to stomach Bengals content at this point in time for some of the fans. We appreciate you sticking with us. We appreciate you tuning in live or after the fact, whether that is through our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@BengalsOBI, or through a variety of X accounts on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, or after the fact on one of your favorite audio streamers through the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV in CINCY podcast channel, with a slew of other great programs that we bring you on that channel. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran, and we really don't even know where this show is going to go at this point. We've got some ideas, but there's already some ranting and raving going on in our live chats. And John, it's one thing to lose, and it's one thing to lose competitively. It's one thing to have back-to-back losses, all of that. But to have 2 of these losses in this kind of fashion, regardless of you having a backup quarterback, it's simply unacceptable.
Consecutively, right? I think that's the main thing. That's like my biggest takeaway. We've seen some absolute clunkers in this era of Zach Taylor, right? With or without Joe Burrow. Even when Joe Burrow was healthy, even with his weapons healthy, we've seen them looked embarrassed against some teams that they probably shouldn't lose to. Never have I seen this team under this coaching staff in this era fall this flat twice in a row. It hasn't happened at this magnitude in 17 years. I completely forgot about the 2008 season when Ryan Fitzpatrick took over for Carson Palmer after his elbow injury, but they lost to the Baltimore Ravens and Indianapolis Colts by a total score differential of -63. They scored 3 points in each of those games. And this is the same thing. They scored, I guess, 13 points this time in this 2-week span because they got a touchdown to Drew Sample in garbage time last week against the Vikings, but they got outscored by a combined 63 points in 2 consecutive weeks. And that's why right now I've never quite felt like this with this coaching staff, with this regime, because I've never seen them fall this flat, be this embarrassed on a multi-week span without bouncing back even in the slightest. What was the one thing we wanted them to do, Anthony? Fight, compete, look somewhat competent, and they couldn't do that.
They look none of the above. And that's my biggest problem again, is that, hey, if you were out there and the score was 28-20 or 26-17, where it was maybe a possession, 2 possessions, that sort of thing, you go, okay, well, I mean, they're still finding their way. I mean, every single aspect. And yes, I know Demetrius Knight made that interception in the end zone. You could argue that was even maybe bobbled and dropped, but I mean, there were a couple of minute bright spots in this one, but for 2 straight weeks, this has been absolutely unwatchable football from the Cincinnati Bengals. Unwatchable football, whether it was the 5 turnovers from last week or just failing to do anything offensively, getting the ball to your stars, penalties galore last night, whether you want to argue with them or not. That is an uncharacteristic element of Zach Taylor's teams. Again, I think it's more, and I don't want to question because I'm not in the locker room or anything like that, but body language speaks volumes. You had Jamar Chase kind of having some form of, I don't even know if you want to call it a heated exchange, but some sort of an exchange with Zach Taylor on the sideline. He was a non-factor, although he was open quite a bit last night, just did not get the ball. T. Higgins made a nice play that really could have turned things around, and then the Bengals get a penalty on that play. And that was really symbolic for the rest of the evening that wiped out a 35-plus yard play where he kind of just mossed the defensive back that was covering him there. So everything that could go wrong basically did. It wasn't a comedy of turnover errors like it was the week prior. But if you were hoping for something that was saying, okay, last week we took a major step back, let's take a couple baby steps forward this week, even if it is a loss. Tough defense, tough team, tough atmosphere, prime time. You get it. There was just, I don't even know what you take away from this that's positive at all, really. I mean, I just, like you said, I don't know where the effort level is. I know a lot of the star players are obviously crestfallen, if you will, because of Joe Burrow not being in the lineup, but you got to move on. And you have to put some type of threat on the field. And the Bengals, I mean, that was quite frankly just I don't even know what was more embarrassing. The 5 turnovers last week, I would kind of lean that way and all of that, or this on Monday Night Football. And thank God there was another Monday night game going on at least simultaneously with this one, because a lot of fans were probably like, click.
I don't think anyone was more pissed watching this game than Troy Aikman. Just listening to the broadcast, he was just beside himself for the entirety of the game, which is kind of on par with Aikman now. He's very honest in the booth, but
he's kind of a little grouchy guy now.
Yeah, he's just kind of get off my lawn guy at this point. Which I can kind of respect to a certain degree. I think this week is worse though, because I don't even want to go into the turnovers last week, because I think we can all agree that is not going to happen every single week. And that was basically just a rarity of all rarities, right? The issue though, and this was my problem last week, is that Zach solely focused on we can't turn the ball over 5 times and expect to win. No shit, right? But the rest of the game wasn't good enough. Even without the turnovers, the team was not good enough to compete against the Vikings, and you still got completely rolled even without the points off the turnovers, right? So it didn't seem like the focus was where it should have been entering this week, and the fact that basically all the same problems, aside from the turnovers from Minnesota, carried over into this game. You had an offensive line that still couldn't generate any movement. Offensive line played worse somehow in pass protection all across the board, even with a new starter out there in Jalen Rivers, who didn't particularly look great in his first ever start. You had a quarterback that was still erratic, who looked even more inaccurate than he had previously looked. And accuracy has been Jake Browning's one calling card to his game, and that just was nowhere to be found. The offense in itself was just reliant on these 50-50 fade deep routes. There was no action over the middle. The few times they went over the middle, Andre Osavas was wide open there. Again, focusing on these very low percentage route concepts, expecting Jake Browning to make throws that Joe Burrow makes with ease. None of it made sense necessarily from an offensive standpoint. That's why you got to 7 or 8 consecutive punts after kicking a field goal on the first drive, which honestly, you're down that far anyways. You probably want to get the touchdown there regardless, especially considering this is the state of your offense. It seemed like it was a complete negligence of what was actually wrong with this team, and just relying on, the turnovers won't be there next week, everything will be fine. No, this offense can't do anything right.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And Andrew Dench here, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, in our live Facebook chat says, held them to 7 points in the second half, the 4th down call. I mean, I guess that's something you can hang your hat on. But, John, I mean, there were some wide open plays also that either Bo Nix missed the pass or, receiver dropped it. And this score could have been better. And plus, when you're up a couple of scores at the half, you kind of go into conservative mode, I guess, a little bit. I know that's not really Sean Payton style, but you kind of let's just get out of here with the win. And so there might have been a little bit of that as well. I don't want to throw a complete cold bucket of water on Andrew's comment here, but that's kind of where my feelings were through this. Here's my biggest qualm on this. And I guess this will go into a later segment we're going to talk about in terms of, what's coming next. What, are there different players that may or may not be in or out of the lineup, but it's not just, errors and missed reads and all that kind of stuff. And it's not just losing. It is losing in the most bland, like, at least if you're going to lose with Jake Browning and this season may or may not be a waste, do it and be entertaining. There was nothing with the stars they have on that side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball. There was nothing entertaining about this game. And it's the same could be said really last week. If you're going to lose with some style, I guess. That's probably not the greatest coach mantra or team mantra, but there is nothing particularly on offense that is inspiring any kind of hope right now to say, okay, Jake Browning can recapture that magic from 2023. This team has the star players. They're healthy. They just need another week. I guess you could say more time to reinstall this system or what have you, but the offensive line is completely dysfunctional. Like you said, Browning is missing guys or 50-50 balls that just really, I don't even know 50-50 is the right projection on some of those throws that were made. Yeah. And on top of that, you also have guys that are open that aren't getting the ball that are missed by the quarterback. So there is just, again, if we were sitting here talking 28-20, hey, this is a building block. Yeah, they got some tough games coming up, but there were some things you can really build upon in this one. The last 2 weeks have shown us nothing to inspire hope for the Lions, for the Packers. You've got some tough ass games coming up, and it's like, what record is going to be broken next week?
I think most people know that right now it's like all in coaching because, just last night, obviously the difference in resumes between Sean Payton and Zach Taylor is pretty stark. And just watch how easy it was for Denver to find space on the perimeter and gain easy yards without Bo Nix doing anything particularly special. Like you said, he either missed a couple throws or his receivers let him down the field where they should have scored more than 28 points, right? So even with the points that were taken off the board from penalties that were given to the Bengals, this was still a blowout. But the Broncos had very much an easy time just driving down the field without even doing anything remotely special, but they just were able to manufacture easy yardage. The Bengals are allergic to doing that, and it makes no sense with the weapons that they have. The infrastructure of this offense is just completely bamboozled. And it doesn't help that the offensive line, like you said, is just dysfunctional from left to right. You're seeing a bad year right now from Orlando Brown Jr. You had arguably the worst game of Amarius Mims' career. You had a nightmare debut from Jalen Rivers. I think Ted Karras is probably your best offensive lineman last night, and he had a nice little bounce back game from last week from Minnesota. But if a decent center is all that you have to hang your hat on for that protection group with a quarterback that can't replicate the magic in and out of the pocket like your star quarterback can, there's nothing there, right? So it just seems like as the years have gone on since that Super Bowl, someone said it in the chat, and I think it makes perfect sense, man. This whole operation is dependent on Joe Burrow just doing everything in his power. And once you take him out of the equation, this team looks like the worst team in the NFL. And it just seems like that has gotten more and more true since 2021, where in 2023, like there was a base in terms of offensive talent and guys working together in the later part of the season where they could help Browning, achieve some success. But then last year, Burrow did everything in his power just to get to 9-8 with that season that he had. And then you take him out of the equation with basically the same roster and even worse coaching staff, maybe it all looks terrible.
Well, and we'll talk coaching in just a second, but one thing I want to bring up, and I'd love to get your thoughts. If you go through these first 4 games of the season, and I know there was kind of some wackiness in the Jacksonville game where Browning came in, he threw 3 picks in that one, but he also scored 3 touchdowns. So there was kind of some late magic there, but I have found, and this was true last night as well, in the first 2 drives of the game against Cleveland, the Bengals were moving well on offense, and then things completely sputtered. You could argue a little bit of that with the Jaguars until Browning came in and just started playing backyard football type of thing. Bengals a little bit in Minnesota. That game got out of control early, but they were kind of in it. The offense was doing some things early. And then this game, opening drive, they go down. They were close to scoring a touchdown. They opted for the field goal, but they looked like there was some cohesion there. But after those scripted first two drives, in my opinion, the wheels get wobbly, things fall apart, and they aren't, whatever you want to call it, adjusting, continuing momentum, all of the above. That's something that I have noticed as a trend through this first month of the season. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think these 2 weeks are kind of like isolated in that sense where you just don't know what to expect with this offense with Browning. But I do think that, I mean, last night they were able to, gain some movement up front with Chase Brown. They were able to run the ball a little bit better compared to last week, and that was shown on the first drive. And, they've definitely wanted to target Riley Moss like they did last year. And, Riley Moss, I think, was having some PTSD guarding T. Higgins again. But again, like they just kind of stuck with that. They just kind of said, okay, we like our guys on the outside. We want them to win one-on-one matchups, and we'll have Jamar Chase, kind of draw the attention away from, via Pat Surtain and everything like that. And they just tried to go with those route concepts that, you would normally trust Burrow to connect with his star receivers, but you just don't trust Browning to do so. And there wasn't anything easy for Browning to really go with. And therefore he had just the most, pedestrian performance possible, where he didn't put the ball necessarily in harm's way like he's done the first 2 games, but he didn't provide any value with you. And that's why there was no drives that were sustained. So it was just a stark lack of, like you said, adjusting and making some tweaks in order to, gain something, because at a certain point, the Broncos pass rush was going to pop off and, come alive. And with this team still not being able to get plays in until the very last second, I'm surprised, Anthony, that it hasn't happened more often, where you had Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper on both sides just timing the snap right when the play clock got to 0, and Amari Smith and Orlando Brown Jr. didn't have a chance because the edges just know when the ball is going to get snapped, and they both met Browning at the quarterback. Like, when you consistently just snap the ball on the road with 0 seconds on the play clock, it's a total advantage for the defense. And obviously the offensive line got made fun of that for that, but that is a much larger issue than just the offensive line being slow off the snap when you give the defense that advantage. And that's just been it was a problem on punt. They had a delay of game for punting. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand how this is an issue every single week with this team.
Well, that is a fantastic segue, and we also have a. You know what? We're going to mix this up, John. Okay. No, we're not. We're not going to mix it up. Let's talk about the quarterback, because this is a little bit of what you're talking about here. But look, man, Browning, I think we all kind of felt like, well, hey, he'll at least make things entertaining, fun, keep it interesting, that sort of thing. It's only, on one hand, it's only been 2 games, but it has been an abject disaster of 2 games. And it has been on him. It has been on the offensive line. It has been on the defense. It's been on, there is no one immune to criticism, including the coaching staff at this point here. But, at what point, there was a kind of a report out there, an insider where, NFL insider was saying, maybe the Bengals may be kicking around the idea of a Russell Wilson since he got benched and Jackson Dart got the win this Sunday, that sort of thing in his first start. I mean, I don't know. The options are pretty slim out there. You've got 2 guys on the Giants that may interest you, Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson. Maybe you come calling for one of the Browns quarterbacks. They look like they're going to make a quarterback change this week from Flacco. They are still waiting, I think, for Deshaun Watson to come back. And so who knows what that whole cycle of 4 guys that they've got in that mix there, what that's going to look like. You've got Kirk Cousins and that fluid situation in Atlanta. So, I mean, there's some players out there. I guess the question is there any way, is 2 games too small of a sample size, despite the disaster of the 2 games? Is this too small of a sample size to give up on Jake Browning and think that he can recapture some of that 2023 form? Or should the Bengals be hitting that red emergency button and getting the bat phone going and calling on some of these guys?
the button should be pushed at this point, at least to explore these options. I don't know if it
Yeah.
has been pushed. I would say, if I'm speaking from the perspective of the Bengals and who makes these decisions, I would say we're still a couple weeks too early. I think if they were to get to like a game under 500 and Browning was still just not cutting it by the trade deadline, maybe you would see something in which you would obviously try to knock the price down as much as possible for one of these quarterbacks. Like I don't think the Bengals want to give up like a top fifth round or fourth round pick for a quarterback that they may not feel like is going to be here for more than just a season. But that would be a strong indicator about how serious they are about making the playoffs and how serious Zach Taylor is about keeping his job, because 2 games sample size is small, but he looks absolutely terrible. Like, they don't look
lost,
and he's the best one that they got. So like, where do they go? I don't know what you can build off of in these 2 weeks. You don't do anything well. So like, what is happening in practice? What are you repping in practice in which there's anything positive with this guy, unless your defense is Swiss cheese, which, to be honest, we haven't really talked much about the defense, but they weren't particularly great either. They were slow and a lot of missed angles and everything like that. But, again, there's just so many problems here. We only have so much time to go through here. I would definitely explore, seeing what the price is for a guy like a Russell Wilson, or, I mean, hell, like, yeah, Jameis would be fun too. So yeah, see what the Giants want, and at least get those conversations going, because like you said, the Lions come to town. Micah Parsons and the Packers are foaming at the mouth right now to play this team. The Pittsburgh Steelers always know how to rush the passer against this team. I don't know where the confidence is in Browning at this point. I don't know how they can just stick to their guns and say we believe in this guy when there's nothing to believe in.
Well, this is a little bit of that Bengals, and I say this with all due respect. This is a little bit of that for those who have followed the team, covered the team for any period of time. This is a little bit of that Bengals overconfidence in who they have and what guys have done in the past. And they are a little less of a what have you done for me lately team than many others in the league. And so they had felt, number one, that Joe Burrow was going to be healthy this year. And number two, they had felt that being the case, they would have a very competitive case to make noise in the AFC North. More on that in a second too, by the way. And then it's also just, hey, he did Jake Browning's done this before. He's kept us competitive if something does happen. But now you look at this, you look at these 2 games and you go, well, yeah, that was 2 years ago. So I get the trust, and this team has always, and its brain trust has always been about the devil they know and not the ones that they don't. That's how they've largely approached free agency, outside or inside. And now you're kind of seeing that while that does have dividends, and that does, coaching staffs like to have their guys, right? They like to have guys that, you see a coach move from team to team, and they bring in a veteran that you go, okay, that makes sense. He was with them in X team, that sort of thing. So there's logic in that. But I feel like the Bengals are much more inclined to that devil philosophy than many other teams. And these are the instances, these are the games where you truly see the negative effects of that biting them in the butt. And when you do not have a big sense of compete, yeah, you've done stuff for us before, but you're starting, but that doesn't mean you're going to start all year if you're going to slack or all that kind of stuff. This team doesn't feel like it has that air or that aura about them. I could be wrong, but when you look at these last 2 games, I feel that there's some truth to that.
I mean, yeah, like the nature of the franchise is, the circle is tight, right? Of people that you trust. That's why it took them so long to just venture into free agency in the first place. It's why they give head coaches the longest leashes possible now after the 90s. It's why they don't expand hardly anything within their personnel department. That was a rarity that happened this year, right? When they hired a handful of new scouts. It's why Duke Tobin has been here for my entire life. Nothing changes unless something changes, and they trust the people that they trust, and therefore that kind of leaks into building the roster. It's how they want their coaches to also feel like that as well. We've seen some progressive nature in terms of Zach Taylor moving on from players that haven't necessarily worked out a little bit quicker than what we saw from the previous tenure, but naturally we knew that they weren't going to trade for another quarterback as soon as Burrow got hurt. And now it's just about how bad can this get before they feel like they have to do something. Because again, if you're at the trade deadline and this team is hypothetically, let's say they get one more win, right? Let's say they're 3-5 and they're still terrible. They're still on the outside looking in on the playoffs. What is the mindset? Are they just going to just fold it in and just go to next year? Because again, Zach Taylor's under contract for another year. Or is this it? Do they have to go all in at this point and trade for a quarterback? I don't know, but I think it's still a little bit too early for me, someone who knows this team very well, to say that that's going to happen. We just don't know.
You bring up a really interesting scenario. Do you hang your hat on that 1.5 wins from Jake Browning in that scenario? Or do you look at the 5 losses, right? And say, oh, because here's the other element. We're going to talk about this in a second. There are vulnerable the AFC powerhouses that we have seen since the Bengals have become one themselves back in 21-22. There are vulnerabilities there. And we saw it Sunday on full display. The Chiefs are 2-2 themselves, but they had a lackluster start to the season. They absolutely throttled the Baltimore Ravens, who are 1-3. You have the Bills, looking a little bit shaky against the Saints. And all kinds of different things that occurred where you say, man, this really, if Burrow was healthy and they built upon that 2-0 start, this really could have been a special year for them, but I guess we'll never know. And also the other element to your scenario, John, is let's say they're 3-5. Let's say they're that, the old NFL deal where they keep everybody's hope alive in the mix or in the hunt, right? When they do the playoff picture, and you're like, that team has a losing record. How are they in the hunt type of thing? But would they hang their hat on that and potentially say Joe Burrow's coming back in mid-December and we could get those last few games so we don't need to make another move type of thing? Very interesting scenario that you propose there, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But there's no doubt about the fact that Jake Browning is struggling. It is not on all of Jake Browning's shoulders or right shoulder per se. The offensive line, as we said, is just playing at a disastrous level right now. The defense, they'll get the occasional stop, but when the offense isn't moving, they're put in bad spots. By the way, they're playing in altitude last night as well. That can't be easy, going back out there. But regardless, Al Golden has not been the key master to this team as a lot of people expected. And so, John, 13 points, including a garbage touchdown the last 2 weeks. 13 points. It's mind-boggling, and it's unacceptable. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to be here for a handful of more minutes, talking about a lot of different things on this episode of The Aftermath, and this next segment I'm sure will pique a lot of conversation in just a second. But I want to remind folks to get this show on your favorite audio platform, whether that is iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the major ones. We are there through the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV in CINCY podcast channel, along with a number of other shows that you can get there. We've had some special guests on this show, and I know the other shows have as well. So hopefully you have enjoyed those. And of course, if you like to tune in live, you can find our stuff embedded on Cincy Jungle articles and our YouTube channel, The Orange and Black Insider, and of course, a couple of other X accounts, including that of Cincy Jungle. But we appreciate all of your support. Hopefully you continue to hang with us, even if this season spirals more and more out of control. But we appreciate the enthusiasm. We appreciate all of your support. We've got a lot of people tuning in live through a number of platforms. We appreciate you all as we sit here and all try and professionally vent, I guess, about the Cincinnati Bengals. But I want to bring this up because this is the topic du jour, if you will. And going along with this, of course, is Mr. Generosity's comment. I do not understand how you have extra days before your game and come out looking absolutely lost. Also, am I the only one missing Frank Pollock? You might be the only one missing Frank. Well, I don't think you're the only one, but I might be a little bit of a non-crowded island on that one, Mr. Whisper. I mean, the whole point is, well, let me address two things, that the two kind of points on this comment. This was a big qualm with all of us with Marvin Lewis. Remember how bad he was coming out of a bye, where it was like, okay, you have an extra week to prepare and you just get throttled or look completely unprepared. What did you do for that extra week? That was a big thing. But this, again, goes into this. I know it's a tough situation with Jake Browning, not Joe Burrow, but you had the extra week. You had all the right comments from Zach. I feel really good about where we're at this week. And we've had a good week of preparation and all that kind of stuff. You had the extra day. Some of the guys you thought you maybe wouldn't have this week in terms of injury, you did have, being Samaje Perine, Dalton Reisner, etc. And you still come out looking like this. As for Frank Pollock, and I want to get your thoughts on both of these comments too, John. As for Frank Pollock, for me, yeah, he did some good things, but this has been a long time trend with the Cincinnati Bengals. Frank Pollock's first stint, what was the one dude that Zach's uncle-in-law or whatever? Yeah, God. That guy, and then Pollock again, and now we've got Scott Peters. And so this has been a theme, and this has been an element where this goes back to that critical draft. To me, the offensive line struggles goes back to that critical draft where the Bengals drafted Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher. And since that point, they have not had, they tried Cordy Glenn, they tried Billy Price, they tried Mims and Orlando Brown Jr. They've made investments, and pretty heavy investments, high picks. Orlando Brown Jr. was a big free agent. Yet somehow when they get here in Cincinnati over the last, what's that been now, 10 years, 12 years, it has been disastrous. These guys don't reach their potential. They maybe never even had a potential at the NFL level and were overdrafted, or they have just not developed to be solid or superstar type players. And I can't really explain that. So I'm not really saying I miss Frank Pollock so much, because we've seen ebbs and flows, a lot of negatives in his times in Cincinnati regardless. But this has been a theme for a while now on the offensive line with the Bengals.
Yeah, let's just start there. No one's missing Frank Pollock because he just wasn't a mesh with his coaching staff. There was a lot of things that hasn't been officially reported about him clashing with Zach Taylor, and his philosophy as a coach, his background as a coach, being a wide zone guy, everything wasn't a mix. And they tried to have him do things that he wasn't, obviously brought up with his background as coaching. He needed to go, unfortunately. I don't think he was a bad coach per se, but it wasn't a fit. The plan with Scott Peters was, okay, we have an offensive line that is tasked with the hardest job in the entire sport, which is to have these true drop pack settings for 60% of the time, which means that you're on an island in pass pro more often than anyone else. And that's tough in today's NFL when pass rushers are literal aliens, like Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper, John Franklin Myers, who all had really great nights last night. You need a phenomenal offensive line to make that work, especially with a quarterback that doesn't create for himself. That is more or less a statue. I don't think Jake Browning can move a little bit, but in terms of his pocket savviness, in terms of his pocket management, it's not good, right? So you need perfect protection with an offensive line that isn't quite suited to do that. That's the reason why Orlando Brown Jr. has been so inconsistent since coming here, coming from other offenses like the Chiefs and the Ravens, where they put a lot less pressure on individual offensive linemen. Amarius Mims, for all of his quality traits, he had a bad game last night, but he came from a system in Georgia where they ran the ball a ton, and they didn't always put him on an island, right? He had the promise and potential to be someone like that, but it makes sense as to now he's been put in a tough spot. The same goes with Dylan Fairchild. The same goes with Jalen Rivers, right? It is, again, a scheme for this offensive line that is the hardest in the NFL, and you can't just say that the offensive line is fine because their job is tough. You need better athletes to execute what you want to do if that's what you want to do it, or else just make it easier, which they haven't done so far in these two games of Browning. But, again, Scott Peters is just one coach. He's just one symptom of a much larger problem with the fact that coaching clearly is the biggest issue on this team, outside of obviously the prerequisite starting at the top is not good either with the actual top of the organization, right? And that needs to be said every single time that we have these discussions, because coaching is just coaching when you're talking about the grand scheme of an organization. But no one looks prepared. No one looks focused, disciplined, whatever adjective, noun, verb you want to use there. No one looks ready to play their best. No one looks to be positioned to play their best, and no one is playing at their best. You're seeing regression all across the board with these guys. If the plan wasn't to change the roster like you probably should have, especially on the defensive side of the ball, then everything is on coaching. And if you look even worse than you did last year, backup quarterback being in there be damned, it's on coaching. There's no other way around it. Like this was Zach Taylor's shot about like, okay, just refresh the coaching on the defensive side of the ball, build off things that we have on the offensive side of the ball, and things will be fine with this roster. That's not the case. You can't blame the roster when all we did this offseason was say this roster probably isn't enough to comfortably get to where you want to go. You're just going to have Joe Burrow be Superman again, and he can't be Superman because the offensive line was still put in a bad spot to protect him, and then he ended up getting hurt. So there's no other focus right now other than coaching is not good enough, and every seat needs to be hot. And the people who signed off on this plan at the very top probably shouldn't have signed off on it.
That might have been one of your best takes, I think. And you and I have worked really together a long time. Yeah, that was phenomenal, buddy. Hey. But I'm gonna expand on that. And obviously, you can talk about the top down as you did, right? Ownership and lack of scouts, and all that. What did we do at the coaching staff level? What did we do at the roster? I want to talk about something you mentioned about the offensive line, where you said they are constantly put in arguably the hardest individual situations as offensive linemen in the NFL based on the assignments and the scheme that they run, etc. Okay, so that being the case, why then do you not draft players that you feel more adequately fit that scheme and can work a little bit more one-on-one on an island, that sort of thing? And then you go another layer. Why can you not develop the players you have drafted as coaching staff to be able to perform what you want them to perform? Then you go another layer up from that. Why do you have a small, the smallest scouting staff, I think, in the league? Why do you have that limited ability to then use those two tiers? Because we know that the coaches are way more into the scouting process for the Cincinnati Bengals than many other teams, if not any other team. And they almost act in dual roles. Why then do you have that small of a scouting staff to then misidentify the players down here that you draft to not fit your system and not put your coaches in an ability to do you see what I'm saying? This is a full, a lot of people like to trickle down. I'm working my way back up.
Yeah.
Why is it this way? Why is it this way? And why is it this way year after year? And we've talked about, okay, Joe Burrow had his knee blown out his rookie year. Okay, maybe you learn a lesson there, right? Especially when the same thing happened to Carson Palmer in 2005. Okay, then he has this weird wrist injury that no other NFL quarterback has had. Okay, let's really, really reevaluate everything to protect our franchise quarterback who has gotten us to a Super Bowl for the first time since 1988. Let's reevaluate things. So to me, there is a trickle-down effect, but if you go, okay, players, coaches, and I hate to do a hierarchy like that, but that is kind of how football organizations work in terms of employment status. Why then is this scouting coaching area that blends far more together than many other teams, if not any other team, why then is there that issue and this disconnect to identifying the right players, particularly on the offensive line? And why does ownership then not recognize that issue right there that then directly affects your roster? That's what drives me nuts. And we can talk about Zach Taylor play calls and not preparing players and all of that. There's a lot to it because Zach Taylor has staved off a lot of the fire Zach Taylor people, especially this offseason, by scapegoating a lot of different defensive coaches and assistant coaches. That was the purge that was supposed to be the big cure-all to this team and getting back to the playoffs. It ain't happening. And I don't even know if that would have been a cure-all at this point. I know it's easy to say after back-to-back losses with Jake Browning under center. I don't even know if that would have been the cure-all with Burrow in the lineup anyway. Based on what we saw in those first two games, they kind of, I don't want to say they lucked into those wins, but
they did.
I mean, they kind of did. They kind of did. So again, this is all about how you run your organization top to bottom. But if you work your way up, you can kind of also see a different kind of order or a different kind of vision of issues and how that works. And so to me, when you bring up the offensive line and how they are placed routinely in the most difficult situations potentially in the NFL, I work my way back up, and I just don't understand the lack of identifying this is a critical area where we are deficient. This is a critical area where we are deficient. And you can cycle through coaches, and the Bengals may do so after the season, middle of the season, whatever. You can cycle through all that stuff. But again, like you said, to preface everything, it starts with organizational culture. It starts with how you run your football team, how you run your organization. And there are still, despite all of the good things the Bengals have done over recent years and the recent success that they have had as a team, there are still clear organizational issues that affects all the levels of the team.
That wasn't too bad yourself.
Thanks. I'm out of breath.
I think to kind of wrap this up, for me, very rarely have the Bengals actually gone to surgery when they need surgery. Typically, they just slap a Band-Aid down because it's cheaper. Like, it's just that's the analogy, right? Just patchworking issues with either, instead of revamping a bad defense, just assuming that new coaches can make the most out of talent that wasn't utilized in the first place. Now you're kind of seeing that talent may not be so talented after all. Maybe the coaching that was brought in isn't as good as it needs to be. Maybe it's a combination of both. And when they have these problems personnel wise, obviously coaches get the first order of blame. But like you said, there's always been this disconnect between the personnel department and the coaching staff in terms of what they want. That was the biggest reason as to why it didn't work out with Lou and Arumo. Maybe Lou just kind of knew that some of these draft picks just weren't up to snuff and wanted to stick by the guys, the veterans that he knew. Unfortunately, the veterans that he knew also weren't good enough anymore. So it's worse against worse, right? Like it's a lose-lose situation for them, which is why it ended up being so bad. Sometimes that's just the case. Sometimes there isn't a right answer with the scenario that you have to play with. Sometimes the right answer is outside of the building, or it's different decisions that the organization should have made. And right now, you can't trust this organization to make any right decision.
This we can talk till we're blue in the face about head coaches and Zach Taylor's hot seat and all that kind of stuff, but we are seeing a little bit of a pattern. And if you remember, towards the end of Marvin Lewis's tenure, the Bengals in that 2018 season, didn't they start off 4-0? Or I mean, they were winning games. I mean, they started off hot, and then they ended up winning 6 games. I don't have the record in front of me, but you remember they had the thrilling Sam Hubbard had a I think it was a fumble return touchdown against Miami. AJ Green had that diving catch against the Falcons last second. That was a fun start to the season. Well, things derailed, and there was a slow Terrell Austin, you get fired in the middle of the season, right? And there's this slow, it's this guy. It's this guy. And it is kind of a little bit of a flailing from the head coach to deflect blame, but also try and keep their job at an organization that is notorious for slow moving and being loyal to people, loyal to a fault. Loyalty is a fantastic trait, but when you're loyal to a fault, or you're loyal beyond what that loyalty should be given to, there's a problem. And so I'm not calling for Zach Taylor's head. And I don't really like to do that anyway. It's people's livelihood and all that kind of stuff. But there are problems on the roster. There are problems at the coaching level. There's problem in the scouting department, and it starts at the top. And what you're when that top those top people, you don't have to be a what's her name, Carly Ursay on the sidelines or Jerry Jones type, but when those people hide out essentially for the most part and don't accept that responsibility publicly, it just brings a lot of things into question. So, there's not really much more to say about it. I know a lot of people fire Zach. Well, how is the next head coach going to be set up for success? That's my question. You can call out Zach Taylor and Al Golden and whoever else you want to. By the way, Lou Anarumo, I know he soured on folks. His team's 3-1. And the Colts are playing pretty decent football. It's not maybe just because of him, but guys have gone on, and you also have Brian Callahan from this staff who is struggling with the Titans, and that's putting it mildly. So my question is, okay, you want to get rid of Zach? How is the next guy going to be set up for success? That's really the question.
You don't know. You just have to get lucky, because that's just the Bengals memo. They tried to get lucky this year. Didn't get the hand.
It was the overconfidence. It was the overconfidence of what they had, right?
So I think everyone can say that what Zach is doing isn't good enough, and you can evaluate him. You can isolate him in an evaluation and say probably needs to be changed here if things don't get better. But like you said, you don't know if a new coach is going to manage this organization any better than he did, but you don't know until you try. And at this point, there are hundreds of millions of dollars invested in 3 players in the prime of their careers. And I can't imagine that the owners of this team want to see that money go to waste. Something to think about.
I can't imagine the mindsets of those 3 players right now either.
Nope.
They had a bunch of clips showing T and Jamar on the sidelines on, just with their helmets off, kind of looking at each other, talking to each other. But they just look shell shocked, really. It just is like, what is this? What are we experiencing right now? And so you can run whoever you want out of town, and you are entitled to your opinion, whether that's coaches or whatever. But until things infrastructurally change, and I've beat this dead horse multiple times, you may get the same results. And that's what we'll get to our, let's drop the mic and get out of here. I've got a few things. One of which is obviously in times like these, you do go back, even though he never had a playoff win and Zach has, you do go back to Marvin Lewis and what he was able to achieve as the outsider coming in to this organization. They were a laughing stock in so many ways. You can talk about the Jonathan Joseph Gatorade stuff. You can talk about all TJ Hushmanzada and the dirty jock straps or all this kind of stuff that preceded Marvin. This is where I still go back and respect Marvin Lewis a lot. And not that I have a lot of respect for Zach Taylor too, but Marvin Lewis was a culture changer. And unfortunately, I think he did run into a number of, hypothetical brick walls in this organization that did hinder him from having a lot of success. And I think some of it was also on him as a head coach. He wasn't perfect, but times like these, you go back to that and you say, that was a guy who was brought in to change culture. Zach was kind of the same, especially after that long tenure. He did it quite a bit too and built upon Marvin. But I don't know if, that means another savior coach out there has to be brought in. But I don't know. There's just more questions than answers. And one other thing before I drop the mic, and I won't mention names, but I played in a golf tournament recently, and a former Bengals player that was in the tournament said, I was wearing a Bengals hat or something, and they said, they're gonna do well this week. I think they're gonna win, and Browning didn't play as bad as you think if you watch the tape and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know what to make of it after after what we saw Monday night. So not to throw egg on the face there, but I think there were hopes, and there were early signs of the Bengals maybe getting their feet under them, but it just derailed very quickly. But anyway, just a couple little anecdotes on my way out the door. What do you got, John?
Nothing much. I recently put together a playlist of songs that I wish that I would hear again for the first time, or I could hear again for the first time. One of them was my favorite song by Green Day, Wake Me Up When September Ends. Now we're here at September 30th, and the Bengals, I don't think have been this low in a long time. So, well, I guess we're woken up now.
Yeah. Green Day, their first big album, Dookie, had a lot of punk rock and and they still are kind of harder punk rock, but they had a couple little ballads in there that were quality too. What was the other one? Hope You Had the Time of Your Life. That one too, the little ballad there. But so yeah, Wake Me Up When September Ends. That is super apropos, my friend. Thanks everyone for tuning in live, and thanks everybody for this might have been one of our more heavily commented shows that we've had in a while. A lot of people are frustrated. A lot of people have a lot of thoughts, and we appreciate that. We tried to pin as much as we could here while we were doing our own rants here, but we appreciate it. Get this show, which is presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Maybe you want to pick the Bengals to cover next week. Maybe they surprise the Lions. I don't know. Go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book, and check that out. And also, if you do want, I know it's maybe not the most appropriate time to talk about buying Bengals merchandise, but if you do want some exclusive Bengals merchandise, go to FOCO, the fans only company. Both of those, FanDuel and FOCO, the links are provided in the show description, at least on our YouTube channel, I believe on our Facebook, the Cincy Jungle Facebook page as well. For all your news, opinions, analysis, podcast, keep it to cincyjungle.com. And as well, you got to check out what John's doing over at A to Z Sports. We do Bengals news dumps every morning on Cincy Jungle from various authors. And so we try and pin as much of John's stuff as possible there. So make sure if you are on cincyjungle.com that you also check out John's great work at A to Z. John, appreciate you, my friend. This has been, I want to say it's a fun show, but it's also been a frustrating one but it is what it is.
See you guys in October.
Wake me up when September ends.